Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of a series I'm calling What If. Once again, that's kind of a temporary name, but for now we're going with it. This being a show where I kind of talk about like what if a show that kind of has a proper ending, didn't end the way it did necessarily. Like obviously that's not the best way of explaining. Let me give you an example. Like for today's episode, I'm talking about Once Upon a Time. If you're unaware, Once Upon a Time was canceled during its 7th season, but it still had a nice wrap up. They were able to give the show a proper ending, even though it got, canceled. If you're unaware of what Once Upon a Time is, basically the best way to kind of put it is if you took a lot of like Disney tales and like kind of grim fairy tales, so stuff like your Disney princesses type of stuff of like Cinderella, Snow White, the Evil Queen, and then you take a lot of those characters and you kind of remix their stories in a very interesting way. It revolves around Prince Charming and Snow White's daughter Emma being like the savior, and all these storybook characters finding their way into our world. They're under this curse. It's kind of where the show starts. It's a really, really good fantasy show. But like I said, it did sadly get canceled during its 7th season, but it did have a proper ending. And then do not get me wrong, I love the ending of the series. I'm not going to go too much into spoilers about it, but the fact of the matter is it does a really good job of resolving a lot of stuff set up during, well, basically a lot of character stories during up till season 6, as well as like resolving the story of like new characters as well. But that's the sad situation of it, that like, because obviously they had plans for an 8th season. They were kind of hopeful for an 8th season. Sadly, they didn't get it. But obviously, where season 7 is, and this is going to be a little spoilerish, but I'm not going too deep into it. Season 7 is actually kind of a soft reboot. Basically, at the end of season 6, they kind of like soft rebooted the series. So, like, if you're familiar with Once Upon a Time, it's once again kind of spoilerish. Season 7 is a little bit of like you took season 1 and you remixed it a bit, kind of with mainly a new cast, but also some familiar faces as well. I'll kind of leave it at that, kind of under a curse type of situation. But if you look in the final season, in totality, you can definitely tell there's a lot of elements that when you look at the later parts of the season, you're like, oh, this is them heavily wrapping this up. Like if they had an 8th season, a lot of that wouldn't have gone the way it did, I think. But I think that was just them heavily wrapping up a lot of stuff. Or maybe, because I haven't looked into it too deeply, so I don't know how much of it was stuff that they came up with at the last second, like jumped the production really quickly to make an ending. Probably not. Maybe that was the set ending. Like I said, I haven't read too much into it. Like when a show ends like that, I'm always kind of like I say my goodbyes and kind of leave it at that. I literally made a video saying my goodbyes, but nevertheless, it is a situation where it's like you could tell there's a lot of storylines. In particular, I'm blanking on his name, but he's the villain from the Princess and the Frog movie. That dude, him and Regina, aka Evil Queen, but no, obviously she's no longer the Evil Queen. Him and Regina, there was definitely sparks there because it seemed like obviously they had their past and everything, but it seemed like they were setting up some stuff of potentially that getting rekindled, but like spoilers, he kind of got like majorly killed off super fast later on. So it's like, I think if you had time, they would have probably built up that relationship more. Maybe not. Because obviously a lot of the final season was also saying goodbye to a lot of characters that, we probably wouldn't have seen as much anymore. Like for example, Emma, Belle, as well as Rumpelstiltskin. But to be fair, who knows how much of those stories were just kind of, it was always going to be like that, whether they had got an 8th season or not, so it becomes questions like that. But I mean, even when the show ends, I guess you could technically, because they can always do something like in the future where like they bring it back and just like years down the line, like there's always a chance to like reboot the show in the first place. But it's just kind of like where it is now, like I'm kind of okay with the show being what it is, but I would have loved to be able to see where the show would have gone, because basically season 7 introduced like almost like alternate like reality versions of characters, like because obviously prior to like the 7th season we had met Cinderella, but Henry meets a Cinderella from like basically a different dimension, a different like storybook. So like you would have gotten to know a lot of, like for example, there's an Alice, there's actually another Alice, because there was actually a short-lived spin-off of Once Upon a Time. Once Upon a Time in Wonderland, but there's another Alice in season 7, but obviously she has a connectivity to a lot of the characters, and it just, obviously it would have been probably continued going forward, because like the whole thing was about it being Henry's story, but it probably would have gone forward been like Henry and his daughter's story, because Henry, he wanted to kind of, have his time to kind of really be a hero and everything. So I would have loved to see what other characters or what other worlds we would have gotten to experience if the show had continued in an 8th season. I mean, not just an 8th season, would have kept going, because I know a lot of people are like, I don't want a show going on forever. Me, I know I'm super in the minority. I'm one of those people like, you want to keep a show going forever? Sure as hell, I'm 100% supporting it. That's why a show like Supernatural was able to last for 15 seasons. So I think that speaks volumes in itself. Like, obviously, there's enough people behind something wanting something to continue, then it's going to continue. But sadly, obviously, Once Upon a Time wasn't in that position. Sad. But what's also interesting is that Once Upon a Time is also in this interesting position where you have to also ask the question, what if the show had continued? What if the show ended in season 6? Not going into spoilers and stuff like that. When you look at season 6's finale, like especially the way they were setting it up to be like, oh, the final chapter, they pretty much could have ended the show with season 6, but they got renewed for a 7th season. I mean, there's always the thing of like, you could have just been like, no, we're going to end it with 6. You know, like, I'm not going to tell someone to do their job, how they do their job, and when they should end something. But once again, I'm not the best person for that, because I'm like, now keep it going forever if you need to. I would have loved to see the stories later on down the line where everything, you know, could have taken us, like where we could have continued to see Henry's story. But the way season 6 ends, it would have been a perfect ending. Do not get me wrong. Once again, I love the series finale, but at the same time, you're like, season 6 could have been, because it was kind of like a closing of everything that had been built up. Like all storylines had kind of closed at that point. And that's why I'm saying, like in season 7, like a lot of those stories and characters, you kind of see their stories close up while also rapidly kind of going through new characters. So it's a complicated thing of like, because yeah, it came back for a 7th season and everything, and it was awesome, it was great, but at the same time, you're just kind of like, you felt like so much had to be rushed through because it was it got canceled. And it's like, if they had just left it at season 6, but it's like, if they had left it at season 6, you wouldn't have gotten the story and the characters you got to meet in season 7. So it's just like, it leaves you conflicted. So you're just kind of like, I mean, truth be told, it doesn't leave me conflicted, but it's just an interesting thought that can leave you conflicted, or I should rather say, because I'm just like, hey, I'm okay with it getting a 7th season. It's just, like I said, I want it more. You know, I will never be like, oh, I want it less. I want it more. I'm just leave it at that. But I just think it's kind of an interesting thought to be like, oh, season 6 would have been a perfect place to end it off. But once again, I'm glad we got a 7th season, you know, that kind of continue the story. And I would have loved to have seen it continue. And once again, who knows? Like later down the road, they could kind of reboot it. And it's like, I'm not saying like completely scrap everything. They could soft reboot it again. And it's just like keep all that continuity while telling its own story. I mean, I'm sure, because like I said, there was sadly a short-lived spin-off, but there could always be other spin-offs, like other stories that they can pull from following different characters while making winks and nods to characters we come to know and stories we've come to know. Because obviously, like, Once Upon a Time has its own continuity when it comes to all these stories, because like they kind of break it down. Like when you look at the family trees in the show, it's nuts how you go from Peter Pan to Henry and his daughter. And yes, there's a direct correlation between those characters, you know. So it's like when you break down like, oh, how you got from point A to point Z family-wise is nuts, because you're like, oh, that character is connected to this character. This character is the child or father or daughter or related in some shape or form. Their story heavily influenced this character's story, and I love that about the show. It's just making it's a fantastic, you know, fantasy show. You know, obviously I've rambled on enough. In the comments down below, I'd love to get to know your thoughts. Like I said, I made it clear that if I wanted the show keep going, season 8, season 9, go on as long as it possibly could. My question to you, though, is, as I brought up the other thing, would you have preferred, you know, the show had ended at season 6? I'd love to get to know your thoughts. I should also mention, too, if you are curious in any shape or form to watch Once Upon a Time, maybe you haven't seen all of it, or I should have probably mentioned this earlier before I started going into spoilers and stuff like that, but regardless, you can watch it on Netflix, because I'm pretty sure at this point in time it's like all of it, the entirety of the show, because from time to time I've caught my oldest niece watching it, just because I've seen her literally binge the show back and forth at least 6 or 7 times. That's just that I've witnessed. Who knows how many times she's watched it. I know I love the show, but apparently she's an even bigger fan than I am, you know, so it's interesting. But like I said, Netflix is a great place. You can watch it if you're curious about it. But either way, like I said, enough of me talking. Like always, to the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.